Hello everybody, Infinite Shinjo here. Welcome to today's video, and in today's video I am going to be taking each one of Ash's traveling companions and remaking their team. This is certainly a long video, so I'm not gonna waste too much time getting into this. Just know that it was a big pain to deal with, both from trying to come up with teams and also technical difficulties and all that jazz. Normal stuff for me. So, starting off with Brock's team, he has a Geodude, a Crobat, a Fortress, a Steelix, a Sudowoodo, a Krogunk, a Comfey, a Chansey, a Marshtomp, and a Ludicolo. Now, I'm taking into consideration what their teams are currently as of the most recent episode of Pokemon Journeys. So, Mons like Misty's Togetic aren't going to be included because she released that back in Hoenn. But anyway, let's get into what I remade Brock's team to look like. So, I decided to take his Geodude and actually do something with it and evolve it to Golem. It just feels kind of odd that he never evolved it at all. Now granted, Geodude is probably more easier to animate for one reason. I'm not sure if that's why they decided to do that or not. But just like, give him a Golem. It just makes perfect sense. And Steelix and Sudowoodo I kept the same. And then Krogunk, I have to keep it as a Krogunk, right? There doesn't make any sense for me to evolve it into Toxicroak, especially after the confrontation it had with Team Galactic. And then Comfey and Chansey I kept the same because it just makes sense with this whole Pokemon doctor breeding sort of thing. And then as Marshtomp, I took it and evolved it into Swampert. Obviously, this means fan favorite mons like his Crobat, his Fortress, and especially his Ludicolo aren't going to be here. But sometimes some mons have to be the ones to go. So Misty's original team is Azurill, Corsola, Gyarados, Psyduck, Politoed, Starmie, Horsea, Staryu, and Goldeen. So, here's how I remade Misty's team. So, biggest thing, I got rid of Pokemon that don't really need to be there, like Azurill doesn't need to be there. She had a Starmie and a Staryu, don't really need both of them. So, I kept her Corsola and her Gyarados as they are, and her Politoed. And her Psyduck I actually evolved into Golduck. Because there was an episode early on in Pokemon where Misty thought her Psyduck evolved into Golduck because it fell into the water and some stuff. You had to have seen the episode to be there. I remember that episode fondly. So I feel like that would have been perfect to lay the groundwork to evolve her Psyduck into Golduck and actually have it be a competent battler. And like I said, she doesn't need Staryu and Starmie, so I feel like just to give her Starmie works fine. And then as far as Seadra and Sea King, I decided to evolve her Horsea and her Goldeen because, again, she had so many water types and none of them really evolved. And the reason I gave her Dewpider is because Brock got them on when they came back in Alola. I just feel like it would have made perfect sense for Misty to get something. And out of the water types in the region, I feel like Dewpider makes the most sense. Plus, it would kind of add some comedic effect with her finding out Dewpiders are part bug types and she doesn't like bugs. Comedy writes itself. But then we move on to a character that everybody remembers, Tracy Sketchit. Tracy, this isn't going to be hard to remember, has Venonat, Marill, and Scyther. Fortunately, I made his team just a little bit better. So, I evolved his Venonat. Don't really know why he had an unevolved Pokemon, actually multiple unevolved Pokemon. But I leveled up his Venonat and his Marill. I evolved his Scyther because we need more Johto fan service because he already had Marill, so it just makes perfect sense. And then Lapras, just say in this situation that Ash doesn't get the Lapras and Tracy gets the Lapras instead. But since Tracy's out of the way, we can finally go for May. And May's team is Blaziken, Glaceon, Wartortle, Venusaur, Munchlax, Beautifly, and Skitty. And here is what I did with May's team. So Blaziken, Glaceon, and Wartortle and Munchlax for that matter, I kept the same. Because I just don't see May having a Blastoise or a Snorlax. And Beautifly is an iconic May mon, so it just makes sense for her to keep that. And then for the Delcatty, yeah, I evolved her Skitty. There's an episode where Skitty actually meets the Delcatty, so I feel like that makes perfect sense to set that up. And the Duskull, that is gonna need some explanation. So, for any of you savvy Hoenn fans, you may remember that at the very start of the season, when May is riding around on her bike saying she doesn't like Pokemon, a Duskull comes up and spooks her. And even though that would be reason enough to give her Duskull, there's also something else that's being set up with Max. So let's get into Max. He didn't really have any Mons at all. He befriended Mons like a Ralts, Poochyena, crazy enough Jirachi and Deoxys, but I had full range of what I could work with for Max's team. So it works out perfectly that this just is set up perfectly. You'll see what I mean here. So I gave him Sceptile, Gallade, and Bayonet. And the Bayonet worked perfectly with Max because he befriended a Shuppet in the series. And as well, Shuppet and Duskull are kind of like two sides of the same coin. They're both ghost types, they're both found in the same place. But the only issue comes in that Bayonet has a Mega Evolution and Dusclops has a regular evolution, so it kind of falls apart there. But the fact that May and Max both have the version exclusives but not really ghost types, I just feel like that makes more sense. And as for the Gallade, let's just say that Max is based off of Wally here. So Wally has a Gallade in the games, and he befriends a Ralts. It checks out. And I figured with trainers like Max and Bonnie that aren't traditional trainers yet, they'd have to pick a starter. And out of the three, I feel like Max would pick Sceptile, although you could make a case for him getting a Swampert because May has a Blaziken. But since Max saw Ash defeat his father with a Grovyle, it's not crazy to imagine that Max would have a Sceptile. Plus, and I didn't plan this, all three of his Mons have the potential to Mega Evolve. Kinda neat. So next up is Dawn. And Dawn has Piplup, Baniri, Pachirisu, Mamoswine, Togekiss, and Quilava. Here's what I did for Dawn. So, as much as I would love to evolve her Piplup, it just doesn't make sense. I can't really think of a good enough reason. And honestly, Prinplup and Napoleon don't really look like Mons that Dawn would use. And as for Baniri, come on. It's been traveling around with her since the very beginning. I was surprised to find that it didn't evolve now that I thought back years later. Ash even got a Soothe Bell after defeating her in the Hearthome Tag Battle Tournament. So, it's just set up perfectly. And then Pachirisu, Mamoswine, and Togekiss, I kept the exact same way, because the fact that Dawn ran into a doppelganger of herself that wants to enter contest is just too perfect of a plot to just pass up. But I took out her Quilava because we don't need any Johto fan service here. To be fair, we already have Mamoswine that evolved from a Johtomon, and Togekiss, so we have the Johto fan service if you want it that badly. But Dawn did come back in Unova, and out of the Unova Pokédex that I didn't include for Silent and Iris or Ash, I felt like Deerling just makes sense. And look, Dawn and Deerling are both pink, and it can show off the whole seasonal change. And speaking of Unova, let's move over to Silent. Silent originally had a Pansage, a Crustle, and a Stunfisk. Here's what I did to Silent. I evolved his Pansage because it just makes sense in my opinion. And actually, now that I think about it, I probably could have kept the Crustle, but I just didn't want to. Or the Stunfisk. Like, they're just so out there picks, because when I think of Silent, I think of grass types. So I feel like giving him essentially Ash's Leavanny, because if you remember from the Unova episode, I took out Ash's Leavanny, so just say that Silent got it instead. And then as far as Maractus likes to dance around a lot, so I feel like there's some comedic moments with it and Silent. But I just wanted to give Silent a grass-focused team because it just makes sense to me that Silent is associated with grass type. But Iris, on the other hand, if you haven't seen the most recent episodes of Pokemon Journeys, they're not dubbed yet, but if you haven't seen them subbed, there are going to be spoilers here. So I'm pretty sure that all the people that cared about spoilers are gone. Okay, so Iris has a Haxorus, Excadrill, Emolga, Dragonite, and Gible. At least I think that she has a Gible. She hasn't shown it since that one episode, so I don't actually know. So here is what I did for Iris's team. Even though I just went on about Silent being a grass trainer, I just feel like Iris's Excadrill and Iris's Emolga are too iconic to take off of her team. Plus, they can be sort of mascots. Well, Emolga can be at least. Excadrill actually aids in her development greatly, so it just makes sense to keep it. And Haxorus, obviously she already has the Haxorus and the Dragonite, so that's easy to keep. And the Zweilous. Again, another missed opportunity in Unova. There's so many missed opportunities in Unova, and one of them is that one episode where Iris takes care of that dino or whatever, and then she finds out that it belongs to another trainer. It's just kind of weird that they just decided to write that off like that, but I can kind of understand it. At the same time, it would have been perfect to lay groundwork to give Iris a Zweilous, because even in the games, she has a Hydreigon. And at the same time, I wanted to give her another dragon type that's from the Unova Dex, and this is the only one that I could give her that isn't a legendary. But fortunately for me, from Kalos on, the teams get a lot smaller, because from Kalos forward, Ash's friends don't seem to catch many Pokemon, with the exception of one, but we'll get to him. So let's start with Serena, because everybody likes to start with Serena. So she has Braixen, Pancham, and Sylveon. And here's her team. So Braixen and Pancham, I could have evolved them, I just don't see any need to. Delphox and Pangoro just don't look like they fit Serena at all. And I took her Sylveon away. Crazy to think, but I took her Sylveon away because there are so many of Ash's friends that have an Eevee. May already got an Eevee before, so I feel like Serena getting an Eevee just to showcase Sylveon just doesn't make sense to me. Plus, there are already two other female companions down the line that have Eevee that I haven't even discussed yet. As for her other two Mons, let's start with the Altaria first, because that's probably the easier one to explain. What I wanted to do with Serena, Clement, and Bonnie, since in the anime they kind of expanded it to show more than just Kalos Mons, I wanted to give each one of Ash's friends a Mon outside of the Kalos region. So Serena got a Hoenn and a Johto Mon. We'll get to the others later. I gave her an Altaria just because it makes sense for the showcase of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Plus, it can Mega Evolve. So if for whatever reason Serena gets the ability to Mega Evolve, she could get a Mega Altaria. As for the Dunsparce, besides it being a Gen 2 pick, is kind of more of a meme pick to include. So if you remember, in one episode of Unova and one episode of Kalos, Ash tried to capture a Dunsparce twice. He didn't catch it either time. I'm not sure why he tried to capture a Dunsparce, but he did. But let's just say Ash tries to capture a Dunsparce while Serena's just still head over heels for him. Ash can't capture the Dunsparce. Serena, in her love-struck haze, decides to try and capture it herself, and she gets it. That's the main reason that I decided to give her a Dunsparce. It's kind of dumb, I know, but it just kind of fits in a weird way. Then we move over to Clement. And Clement's original team is Bunnelby, Dedenne, Chespin, and Luxray. But let's just say for the purposes of this video, his Dedenne is out of the picture, because since Bonnie is a trainer in this version, she has the Dedenne instead. So here's what I did for Clement's team. I'm not sure if this is a controversial choice, but I decided to evolve his Bunnelby into a Diggersby. It's kind of weird, I know, but considering the first Mon that he's shown to have doesn't evolve all the way, is kind of weird. And Chespin Luxray I kept the same because I can't see Chespin evolving into a Quilladin, even though I did evolve his Bunnelby, but whatever. And then for more Mons outside of Kalos, I decided to give Clement Electros. It's just a cool electric type that not many trainers have been shown to have. Although I don't think there's any canonical team where Clement actually has an Electros, but I just felt like it fits on his team perfectly. But then we move over to Bonnie, and like Max, has no experience with Pokemon whatsoever. Closest you can make is the Dedenne. I had a very wide pool of what I could include for Bonnie's team. And here is what I went for dear old Bonnie. So obviously she has to have the Dedenne, it's part of her character at this point. And like I mentioned with Max, she has to pick a starter, and out of Froakie, Chespin, and Fennekin, I just feel like she would pick Braixen, because she did develop a sisterly bond with Serena, so I feel like it just makes sense that she would pick Fennekin. And then her other two Mons are basically one-off Pokemon that she took care of in episodes. There was an episode that she took care of a Tyrantrum, and there was an episode she took care of a Floette. And if you want to go the extra mile, in multiple scenes where they're camping out, Bonnie is wearing Tyrantrum jammies, so it checks out on both ends. Now, that episode is more memorable in my opinion, the one where she takes care of the Tyrant that she tries to capture and it's already owned by somebody else. But then the Floette episode, I honestly forgot about for a minute. Basically, Bonnie has like a new flower piece in her hair, and a Flabebe attaches itself to it, and then she finds out that the owners of it are getting old or whatever, and I feel like you can tell where I'm going with this. The owners aren't around anymore, and Bonnie decides to fulfill their wishes by taking care of the Flabebe. Plus, if you even want to go the extra mile, you could have this be a subtle reference to AZ's Floette and the Ultimate Weapon. Heck, at this point you could give Bonnie AZ's Floette and I wouldn't say a darn thing. But honestly, Bonnie's was the one that I had the most fun with because I had so much room to play around with. And there were so many cool Mons that Bonnie interacted with, like that shiny Phantump in the episode. And I'm sure there are some other ones, but there was just so much of a variety that I could go with for Bonnie. But now we move on to the Alola squad. If you remember what I said when I remade Ash's Alola team, I said about how I want to give every single one of his friends an Alolan form. So just keep that in mind as we go forward. So first up is Kiawe. Now Kiawe already has an Alolan form, so it doesn't really apply to him. But he has Turtonator, Charizard, and Alolan Marowak. So here's what I did for Kiawe's team. Really, I kept everything the same, I just gave him a Magmar. Because I think one of the houses around where Kiawe is at, there's a group of Magmar in the house, and that's really it. I was thinking about giving him Salazzle, but since Plumeria already has Salazzle, it just doesn't make sense to give him Salazzle as well. But now let's move over to my personal favorite from the Alola crew, Lana. And Lana isn't going to take any time at all because all she had was Primarina and Eevee. And so how I remade her team is I kept her Primarina, I took her Eevee away because, like I said before, so many traveling companions have Eevee. It's just amazing at this point. But she does, in the games, have a Chinchou, so I decided to give her her Chinchou. And as far as her Alolan form, I gave her Raichu. I know Raichu isn't a water type, but it can surf. And there are no Alolan forms that are water type. So it's unfortunate that Lana had to get an Alolan form that isn't her specialty type, but I wanted to give her something at least. Now on the subject of trainers whose teams aren't going to be much to go over, Next up is Mallow. All she had is Sarina. So I kept her Sarina and gave her Alolan Exeggutor. I don't think there are any other Alolan forms that are grass type. If there are, then this is the only one that I feel makes the most sense for her. Really, outside of the Alola Dex, there really wasn't anything that I could include. She did have that Shaman for the time being, but she gave that up at the end, so the only other case I can make, and this is a big one, is have her capture that Oranguru. But again, that's a bit of a stretch. And on the subject of Alola trainers that don't have a big Pokemon roster, up next is Lily. And all she had is Alolan Vulpix. So here's what I did for Lily's team. I feel like this should come to no surprise. I evolved her Vulpix into an Alolan Ninetales, and I took the Eevee that Lana got and gave it to Lily. And I evolved it into an Espeon. At first, Espeon might seem like a weird choice, but the reason I went for it is because her brother, Gladion, has an Umbreon. So I feel like the nice contrast there works fine. And at the same time, I wanted to give somebody from the Alola crew the Eevee. I wanted to give it to Lily since she has so little Mons anyway. And Espeon's just the only one that makes sense to me, on top of everything else that I mentioned. So finally up is Sophocles. And Sophocles has Togedemaru and Vikavolt. So here's what I did with Sophocles. I kept his Togedemaru, I kept his Vikavolt, and I gave him a Alolan Geodude. Kinda weird that he never got an Alolan Geodude, because it is literally an electric type. Now before I go into the next few, this next one is going to be where things get interesting, because I'm going to be covering Go. And Go, if you are familiar with anything with Pokemon Journeys, captures any Pokemon that he sees. So instead of including every single Mon that he'll capture, I decided to focus on the Mons that he already has, because he has probably over 100 species of Pokemon at this point. So I decided to, as far as the most recent episode that I've seen, but with Go's character, it's hard for me to find a time to record this, because I want to record this early enough so I can have time to edit it, and I can record it 1 week, and then in the very next episode he captures a Pokemon. So focusing on what he has, I slimmed it down to 3 Pokemon. And here's what I did for Go. Cinderace, I kept the way it is. I feel like they're building up so well to Go getting an Inteleon, because he already has a Drizzile at this point. So giving him Inteleon, just, that's probably what they're going for. Now you might be thinking at first, Shinjo, why are you giving Go a Marowak? And that's because of the random snow episode early on in the series. Go, something about Go's parents or whatever, I can't remember what. He finds a Cubone, he takes care of it or whatever. At the end of the episode, he captures the Cubone or whatever. And that alone would be interesting enough to include it, because they built up Cubone a little bit more than his other captures. But the more you think about it, honestly, the sadder it gets. Because Cubone itself, its classification is the lonely Pokemon. What we've seen with Go's Sobble evolving into Drizzile, it looks like from Go's past, he was a bit of a loner that kind of kept to himself. In another word, lonely. So I feel Go having a Marowak is just nice symbolism. And in all honesty, I like the idea of Go getting a Marowak, because who has a Marowak, a regular Marowak, on their team? And this idea did kind of strike me right now, but it works out even better. In the episode where Ash and Go reunite with the Alola crew, Go does battle Kiawe. And what does Kiawe have? An Alolan Marowak. If they're trying to set up some sort of thing where they're gonna battle again, it would just make perfect sense for Go to have a regular Marowak. But what do I know? At the same time, it's hard to pick for Go, because one episode he could not use his Squovit, Next episode, it could evolve in a Pokemon eating contest. But wrapping up this list is Koharu, or if you're watching the dub, Chloe. I'm watching the sub, so I'm used to calling her Koharu, but I might slip into saying Chloe a couple of times. But all she has is an Eevee. So here's what I did. Obviously, it's hard to say what else she's going to capture, if anything, but let's start with Eevee. Obviously, they're building up Eevee to be a Gigantamax. I don't think there's any doubt about that. An Eevee that doesn't evolve when in contact with evolutionary stones, it's gotta be a G-Max, right? Of course, you can fast forward to after Pokemon Journeys is done and this whole theory is debunked, but I just feel like they're either having it gonna be G-Max or gonna evolve it into a brand new evolution that'll happen down the road. Who knows? But the other one I included is the Galarian Ponyta from that one random episode where she encounters a Galarian Ponyta. It just makes so much sense for her to get a Galarian Ponyta. It looks like a Mon that she would have. She has that book in her father's study that she read. Not sure why there's a book about what she literally went through in the episode. Maybe they can expand on that. Really, same situation for Koharu that it was for Go. It's hard to say what to include and what to not because the series isn't done yet, so these two are, in essence, incomplete. I wanted to at least get my thoughts out there. And I know that if I didn't include Go and Koharu, then people would ask where they are, so I figured to just take care of it now, even though it's probably going to be wrong. But that is the whole thing of every single one of Ash's traveling companions teams remade. That took a long time. First of all, because it's a lot of trainers to go through, and second of all, technical difficulties and all that. But I hope you enjoyed anyway. If there are any teams that you can add some input for, if there's anything that you feel like I hit on the head perfectly, or if there are things that you think I should change, let me know. I hope you enjoyed. Hit that like button if you did. I'll see you next time. Momentai.